Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump pushing the big, beautiful bill as Republicans face roadblocks in the Senate. Why the president invites everyday Americans to make the case, and what's posing challenges to passing the bill before a July 4th deadline. Iris Tao at the White House. The Pentagon reveals that the massive ordnance-penetrated munition used against the Fordow nuclear facility was created and specifically designed for its intended target. Luis Martinez has more on updates from the Defense Department. Iran's supreme leader makes his first public statement since the ceasefire with Israel. Meanwhile, families of hostages call for an end to the war in the Gaza Strip as well. Jason Perry reports. The Supreme Court today sided with a South Carolina law that blocks Planned Parenthood from accepting Medicaid for abortions. Our legal correspondent Arlie Richards has more on the decision. And New York City Mayor Eric Adams doubling down on his re-election campaign after another candidate, Zohran Mamdani, declared victory in the Democratic primary. David Lamb brings us the latest in the race.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump inviting everyday Americans to the White House today as he makes another push for his massive tax and border bill. It comes, though, as Republicans are facing hurdles in the Senate to pass it before Independence Day. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. What are the president's arguments today for the big, beautiful bill?
Good evening to you as well, Tiff. As Senate Republicans face a looming July 4th deadline to pass the big, beautiful bill and get it onto President Trump's desk, President Trump today held an event at the White House, really putting pressure on GOP holdouts by highlighting the bill's impact on everyday Americans. Specifically, he cites an analysis by the Council of Economic Advisors on how the bill would benefit Americans economically. Watch.
These reforms will protect or create more than 7 million jobs, add 3.1% to economic growth, reduce taxes for the typical American by nearly 15%, and increase take-home pay for the normal family of four by at least $13,000. And that takes place immediately. That's not bad, right? Look, I'm looking at that guy back there, right? That's pretty good.
And President Trump says that if the bill does not pass, Americans' tax bills will increase by 68%. He further invites everyday Americans to stand behind him to illustrate what he's talking about. For example, those invited include a DoorDash driver, an electrical lineman, an auto worker, a farmer, and an ICE agent. Specifically, he says the bill would extend trillions of dollars in his 2017 tax cuts and also spend hundreds of billions of dollars on boosting the border security and also funding for immigration law enforcement. It's also going to cut spending, meanwhile, on some social programs. And today, border czar Tom Homan also came up to the stage to make the case by saying that it should be a bipartisan issue, as more money means that more ICE agents will have more resources to arrest criminals in the streets and make America safer. Watch.
More agents mean more bad guys arrested, taken off the streets of this country every single day. Every day we arrest a public safety threat or national security threat. This makes this country much safer. Who the hell would be against that? And I get irritated, I get pissed off because I'm sick of meeting angel moms and dads. You want to talk about family separation? They buried their children.
And that said, Democrats on the Hill criticized the bill, saying that it's going to only benefit the rich, hurt the poor, and also take away benefits in health care and food aid. And also some Republican holdouts continue to raise issues with the fact that the bill could raise the national deficit. And meanwhile, Republicans can only afford to lose 3 votes, given that all Democrats are expected to vote against the bill. And it's getting to be a more challenging road for Republicans in the Senate, as the Senate parliamentarian or the Senate rule keeper said this week that parts of the bill, including its tax plans, actually violate the Senate's rules. And as both the senators and House members reconcile with that, the White House, meanwhile, maintaining that Trump is adamant that the bill will get passed before the July 4th deadline. And Trump today making a case by appealing to both of what he calls liberals and conservatives. Watch.
But no matter what you are, it's all about common sense. And I think that's the way I've ruled. I do what's right. I want to have borders. I don't want to have transgender for anybody that happens to leave the house at a young age, the things they do. I don't want to have men playing in women's sports. That's got to be, you know.
And during today's event, President Trump also said that he just signed a deal with China yesterday when it comes to trade. He didn't give any further information, but the White House official confirmed to NTD that the administration and China agreed to an additional understanding for a framework to implement the Geneva Trade Agreement. Back to you.
And Iris, what did the president say about the intelligence leak on Iran today?
Right, so the White House for days has been pushing back against reporting, citing a leaked intelligence report saying that U.S. strikes over the weekend failed to totally destroy Iran's nuclear sites. And President Trump today again doubled down that the U.S. strikes have completely obliterated those nuclear facilities. And the White House also criticized news outlets such as, for example, the CNN as well as the New York Times for what it calls biased and incomplete reporting, and accusing those reporters of actually being manipulated by people in the government who the White House says are actually not agreeing with President Trump and try to intentionally leak such information to reporters. Back to you.
All right, Iris, thanks for those updates. A mission 15 years in the making, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, revealed new details of the strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez has more on this story.
First, that the weapons were built, tested, and loaded properly. Two, the weapons were released on speed and on parameters. Three, the weapons all guided to their intended targets and to their intended aim points. Four, the weapons functioned as designed.
In order to dispel misinformation over the U.S. strikes against Iran, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, went point by point over the verifiable evidence the Pentagon has on the strikes on the Fordow nuclear facility.
The cap was forcibly removed by the first weapon, and the main shaft was uncovered. Weapons 2, 3, 4, 5 were tasked to enter the main shaft, move down into the complex at greater than 1,000 feet per second, and explode in the mission space.
There was a sixth massive ordnance penetrator dropped on each of the 2 ventilation shafts at the Fordow nuclear facility for redundancy. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency, DETRA, began designing the munition some 15 years ago.
See, we're here this morning because in hunting for scandals all the time, in trying to find wedges and spin stories, this press corps and the press corps miss historic moments.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth went into detail to clarify crucial elements that were omitted in the reporting of a leaked preliminary assessment of the strikes.
It points out that it's not been coordinated with the intelligence community at all. There's low confidence in this particular report. It says in the report there are gaps in the information. It says in the report multiple linchpin assumptions are what this assessment, a linchpin assumption, you know what that is? That means your entire premise is predicated on a linchpin. If you're wrong, everything else is wrong.
The Department of Defense does not conduct battle damage assessment on its own operations. The intelligence community does. The CIA's assessment is that the strike set back Iran's nuclear program years. General Kane also went into detail of the defense of the U.S. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar.
We believe that this is the largest single Patriot engagement in U.S. military history.
It's important to note that senators received a classified briefing from the CIA on the U.S. strikes against Iran this Thursday.
That report was preliminary. It was done with low confidence. It said it had numerous intelligence gaps. It assumed the worst case scenario with perfect conditions in Iran.
President Trump said that the nuclear stockpile was completely and totally obliterated. I did not receive an adequate answer to that question.
Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Several experts have cautioned that Iran might have moved a stockpile of its highly enriched uranium to shield it from the U.S. strikes ahead of time and could be hiding it in locations unknown to Israel, the U.S., and UN nuclear inspectors. But today, Secretary Hegseth said he's unaware of any intelligence suggesting that to be the case. Iran's supreme leader made his first public statement since the ceasefire was declared with Israel. Meanwhile, families of hostages still held in the Gaza Strip are calling for an end to that war as well. NTD's Jason Perry has the story.
In his first public statement since the ceasefire began with Israel, the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, declared victory in the war.
The Zionist regime almost collapsed and was crushed under the blows of the Islamic Republic. The American regime entered the war directly because it felt that if it didn't, the Zionist regime would be completely destroyed.
And he said that if any future aggression against Iran takes place, the cost for the aggressor will be high. He also claimed that the U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities failed to do anything significant, in stark contrast to what U.S. officials have said. And after a vote on Wednesday, Iran has officially suspended cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, according to Iran's state-run media. The bill says that any future inspections by the UN nuclear watchdog would need approval by Iran's Supreme National Security Council. But on Thursday, the Director General of the IAEA said he still expects inspections of Iran's nuclear facilities to continue.
As soon as I learned there was a ceasefire, I wrote to Dr. Abbas Araghchi, whom I know well, the Iranian Minister of Foreign Affairs. I said, well, we have a ceasefire, conditions will improve, we need to sit down. I didn't say, I'll come immediately to inspect, etc.
Meanwhile, in Israel, families of hostages rallied in Tel Aviv as they continue to call for the release of their loved ones still held captive in the Gaza Strip. Some of them gave messages to President Trump.
Mr. President, sir, as you took the decision to end the war in Iran, I'm asking you to take the decision to bring my son back to life from the tunnels. End the Gaza war now.
And on the same day, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, visited a hospital in Israel that was hit by an Iranian missile last week. And he said he thinks everyone in the world wants the war in the Gaza Strip to end, but there's still work to be done.
The president has made clear Hamas has no future there. They can't stay. Leaving Hamas in place, leaving them in power would be as ridiculous as having left the Nazis in control of Germany at the end of World War II.
Now that there's a ceasefire with Iran, Israeli forces have said they're focusing their attention on the Gaza Strip and returning the hostages. Jason Perry, NTD News.
The Supreme Court today rejected a challenge from Planned Parenthood to a South Carolina law that prevents them from receiving Medicaid funding for abortions. NTD's Arlene Richards has more.
A majority of Supreme Court justices on Thursday rejected Planned Parenthood's challenge to South Carolina's decision to bar the organization from participating in its Medicaid program. The court's ruling comes in response to a lawsuit filed by two Planned Parenthood organizations and a patient against the state of South Carolina. They were seeking access to Medicaid funding for family planning services. The state has a law that prohibits providing public funds for abortions. It deems Planned Parenthood an abortion provider. And in July 2018, South Carolina removed Planned Parenthood from its state Medicaid program. But it took steps to ensure other providers were available to offer similar services. The patient alleged she preferred Planned Parenthood for her gynecological care, but she needed Medicaid. They claimed a provision of federal law allowed them to sue the state for blocking their rights. In a 6-3 decision, the court ruled that they cannot sue the state of South Carolina to enforce that provision because the law doesn't allow private parties to sue state actors. The ruling paves the way for the state to terminate Planned Parenthood's access to Medicaid funding. Justice Neil Gorsuch delivered the opinion for the majority, with Justice Clarence Thomas writing a concurring opinion. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote a dissenting opinion in which she said that the decision today violates the rights of Medicaid recipients to choose their own doctors. Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan joined the dissenting opinion. After the Thursday ruling, 6 more decisions will come on Friday as the High Court winds down its 9-month term. The most closely watched case is President Trump's push to end automatic birthright citizenship. The Justice Department has challenged rulings by 3 lower courts that block the president from enforcing his order limiting birthright citizenship. The department claims the courts vastly overstepped their authority by imposing nationwide injunctions. A ruling in favor of the administration on judicial authority could impact cases beyond birthright citizenship. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Coming up, a former top Venezuelan official pleads guilty to charges of narco-terrorism and drug trafficking in the U.S. Ian Pasdar has details on the indictment. And the U.S. restricts visas to relatives of foreign drug traffickers. The latest on stopping the flow of deadly fentanyl into the U.S. Jack Bradley reports from the State Department when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A top Venezuelan official is pleading guilty to charges of narco-terrorism and drug trafficking in a U.S. court. The suspect is now facing life in prison. NTD's international correspondent Ian Pasdar has more.
General Hugo Armando Bayros, a former director of military intelligence in Venezuela, has pleaded guilty to narco-terrorism and drug trafficking in the United States. The Trump administration says he could face life in prison. He is charged with conspiracy to import cocaine to the U.S., including a 5.6-ton shipment of narcotics transported from Venezuela to Mexico in April of 2006. Meanwhile, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem is in Latin America, meeting with Honduran President Xiomara Castro. She posted these pictures, saying, "We strengthened our partnership to combat illegal immigration by signing a statement of intent for biometric cooperation." Delegations from both countries reportedly addressed border security, immigration, and the fight against drug trafficking. Before heading to Honduras, Noam visited other Latin American countries, including Costa Rica.
Just a few minutes ago, signed an agreement on global entry. As you know, your economy relies a lot on hospitality.
Costa Rica agreed to screen all goods entering the country through its airports and seaports to curb the flow of drugs headed towards the United States. Ian Pasdar, NTD News.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio announces new visa restrictions targeting the illicit flow of fentanyl into the U.S. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more from the State Department.
We will continue to use all necessary tools to deter and dismantle the flow of fentanyl and other.
The State Department announcing a new visa restriction policy targeting family members and business associates of foreign drug traffickers. Now, this policy extends under a previous Biden administration era policy that sanctions these foreign drug traffickers.
This will not only prevent them from entering the United States, but it will serve as a deterrent for continued illicit activities.
Fentanyl has been the leading cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 44. In 2024, there were an average of 220 overdose deaths in the U.S. every year. Much of the fentanyl is sourced in China. The Chinese Communist Party subsidizes the manufacturing and export of fentanyl precursor chemicals, which make their way into the U.S. In the wake of the visa restrictions, the administration's move to block Harvard from admitting foreign students. Harvard has a known record of training CCP officials at their Harvard Kennedy School. There's also student groups in the U.S. across the U.S. universities system with ties to the Chinese Communist Party that pressure Chinese students and dissidents in the U.S.
I'm wondering if the department has concerns about the Chinese student associations in the U.S. given their ties to the Chinese consulates, and they have been described as a tool to extend Chinese influence.
Every single visa decision is a national security decision, no matter who you are applying for a visa.
And on to the Middle East. Though there's a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, things are still tense in the Gaza Strip, with Hamas hostilities still attempting to prevent the Gaza residents from obtaining humanitarian aid. But the State Department announcing $30 million to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation in order to give meals and aid to the residents of Gaza, as they've been proven to successfully do that without being looted by Hamas. Over the past few months, they've already distributed over 46 million meals to Gaza's residents. Now, the U.S. is calling for more countries to step up and provide aid to the residents of Gaza. On July 1st, Secretary of State Marco Rubio will meet with the Quad leaders to establish stronger ties in the face of an increasing aggressive Chinese Communist Party in the Indo-Pacific region.
And next week's summit builds on that momentum to advance a free, open, and secure Indo-Pacific.
And on Friday, here at the State Department, there will be a peace agreement signing between the governments of Rwanda and the Congo in order to open up economic stability for the region. Reporting from the State Department, Jack Bradley, NTD News.
As President Trump rallies Congress to pass his government funding priorities by the 4th of July, disputes continue among both Senate and House Republicans. What will it take to get the bill across the finish line? Be sure to tune in at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for NTD's Capitol Report. We'll sit down with Congressman Marlon Stutzman for his 2 cents. Coming up, Beijing has largely stayed quiet after the U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear sites. Could President Trump's actions in the Middle East be sending a message to the Chinese Communist Party? Adam Savage from the America First Policy Institute joins us to discuss. And an international election monitoring team reports its findings on South Korea's recent national elections. Jason Blair has the highlights when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. After President Trump took decisive action in striking Iran's nuclear sites, China issued a statement of condemnation alongside Russia and Pakistan, but other than that, has refrained from any significant diplomatic or even military support for Iran. Joining us now to discuss is Adam Savage, director of the China Policy Initiative at the America First Policy Institute. Adam, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. Now, first, how are you reading China's response here and what the Chinese Communist Party leadership is considering right now?
Right. I guess you could call it a response or a lack of response because, frankly, they have few tools. Now, we talk about this axis of resistance or the CRINC countries, these 4 countries, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, who sort of have a loose affiliation. Really, the only thing that unites them is that they oppose the United States. They oppose the Western-ruled world order. Now, this is a real test of how they can actually collaborate. Can they step in and help each other? You've seen North Korea has sent troops to the front in Ukraine to help Russia. Russia has helped North Korea with some technological expertise. In this case, though, apparently, China was too isolated as far as providing military assistance. As you noted, really, they've only provided, moral or rhetorical support in this case. And even Iran's tactics to try to close off the Strait of Hormuz was not in consonance with China's interest because 90% of Iran's exports go to China and have to go through the Strait of Hormuz, and actually China benefits from those oil exports as well. So we see, graphically displayed that the interests of these 2 countries actually don't overlap, and China actually has few strategic options. Also, the fact that although their naval power is growing, they do not have the ability to project to the Middle East in the way that the United States does.
Now, part of the success of the U.S. strikes included misdirection with decoy B-2 bombers, 2 of which were sent to Guam. Do you see this as a message to China warning against an invasion of Taiwan?
I believe it is. Of course, the primary purpose of that was to be a feint to throw off the observers, to make those bombers that were going west over the Pacific more easily visible than the ones going to Iran. But yes, I think it does send a message to Beijing because those same bombers that dropped the ordnance, the bunker busters that destroyed the Iranian nuclear facilities, can also hit targets within mainland China. Now, one that analysts have pointed to, which is a very profound one, is the new Pentagon-like headquarters that China has west of Beijing. It's a series of tunnels and bunkers where their military decision-making is now housed. And it very much looks like those Iranian complexes that housed the nuclear materials. That has been proven to be vulnerable now to our bombing missions. Now, are we going to bomb those facilities, which would be an act of war against China? No, probably not. But yes, it's something to give them pause before they act out in the South China Sea, or as you note, in Taiwan, whether invading or taking other provocative action against Taiwan.
And expanding on that, Adam, President Trump has been described as a wild card or being hard to read. Some say is in itself a form of deterrence as world leaders aren't sure what to anticipate. Now, with the changes in the Middle East, is China rethinking its plan for Taiwan?
I disagree a bit with that characterization. I don't disagree that there are elements of unpredictability that President Trump purposely uses, and also that is just part of his personality. However, looking at his first term, he has a track record of judiciously using power and exhibiting deterrence. Before this strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, what I'd always point to is another Iranian example, and that was the assassination of Soleimani, who was the head of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which projected Iranian power around the Middle East to its subsidiaries such as Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, who of course are wreaking havoc on the Red Sea more recently. And so this strike, it didn't involve any boots on the ground. It involved relatively minimal commitment of forces, but it had a profound effect on the ability of Iran to wage war. So I point to that as an example, and he has followed up on that in this new term. Again, there's real teeth behind what he does. He really does think it through, and I think that our enemies, including China, are watching that, and they are concerned about that, not just the unpredictability.
Now, in terms of leverage, many are pointing to China's near monopoly on rare earths. Two states, Oklahoma and Missouri, are actually starting to counter Beijing's grip. Oklahoma with a nickel refinery, lithium battery plant and refinery, and aluminum plant, and Missouri with a cobalt project and another for germanium and gallium, which China restricted exports of last year. First, what do you make of these projects, and do you expect to see more states following?
What I make of them is this is wonderful progress. I mean, and this is relatively only a fraction of what we need as far as these rare earths, which are essential to a lot of our military equipment, electric vehicles, et cetera. But any step is a good step. And, you know, these projects are giving breathing room by the tariffs, by the disruption that China itself has wrought. Because as you point out, they have found these rare earths to be almost a unique point of leverage against the United States. We really hold the cards in this trade relationship because we buy so much more from them than they buy from us. But they've found the supply chains of the rare earths is really a sore point for us. So I'm very glad to see this in these states. And yes, it can and should pop up in other states. But you know, it's a difficult process. Like, for example, if we're talking about a greenfield investment, a new mine, new mining, new refining, this could take up to 10 years lead time to get that up and running at scale. If it's somewhere where a mine has been set up and it's waiting, ready to go, as I know there is a mine for cobalt in Idaho that is in that condition right now, perhaps that would still take 5 years to ramp up. But here's the thing. These companies need to be able to know that they're going to have contracts, defense contracts or commercial contracts. They have to be relatively secure in the price stability. And the problem is that China still has a chokehold on many of those elements, germanium, gallium, cobalt is one I'm familiar with specifically, where they hoard cobalt. They can dump that on the market at any time to distort the prices. So, you know, for example, the government is looking at things that right of center governments are a little uncomfortable with, which is perhaps subsidies, price controls on these elements, stockpiling. These are things that are going to be needed to solidify the prices and the supply so that U.S. companies are able to help in this regard.
And Adam, this afternoon, President Trump said the U.S. signed an agreement with China on Wednesday related to trade, but he didn't specify what he was talking about. And a White House official also confirmed to NTD that the two sides have agreed to an additional understanding for a framework to implement the Geneva Trade Agreement that was reached in May. Now, according to Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, a big part of that agreement is related to China's restrictions on rare earth exports to the U.S. And if China speeds that up, the U.S. might also loosen restrictions of advanced technology in return. First, what's your reaction to this latest development?
Well, I only heard it just before we went on air, so it's new to me as well. But I mean, you know, it's expect the unexpected, and it's as I was describing to a foreign visitor earlier today. Basically, this is all new ground as far as this level of tariffing. These tactics between the two largest economies in the world, who have a huge, trade between them and supply chains between them that are essential to the engine between the two countries, as well as the world economy in general. So these adjustments, and especially with an innovative thinker and actor like President Trump, are going to take all sorts of different directions. I wouldn't necessarily be surprised at anything. I was surprised that not that rare earths were central, but the fact that it seemed to in the last communique, the last tweet by Trump regarding that London agreement, that the rare earths and student visas were connected. That was something I didn't see coming. So listen, it seems that everything's on the table as far as what the deal is, as far as the enforcement. I'm interested to hear more about this. And yeah, it's late breaking. So.
Now, part of reshoring or building a domestic supply requires the know-how, and China is actually tightening its grip on talent. The Wall Street Journal notes that China's putting workers involved in rare earth refining onto a list and taking their passports to keep them in the country. How difficult will it be for the U.S. to create a domestic rare earth supply chain?
Yeah, well, I mean, on both sides, China has been laser focused on building talent, academic prowess, researchers, et cetera. They have something called the 1,000 Talents program, which is fairly well known to gather expertise. And yeah, I mean, we will need this particular expertise to build out this industry. You can't just magically reshore. I think there's a parallel here actually with the shipbuilding industry, where everyone agrees there's a problem. Everyone agrees we need to rebuild our capacity to match China for both commercial and military shipbuilding. And number one, we don't have as many facilities, but number two, we haven't engaged in this activity in decades. So there's an aging workforce. There's an undertrained workforce. We're bringing in the South Koreans to revive our Philadelphia shipyard, for example. So yeah, these are highly specialized fields that Americans have not done in decades, or in the case of rare earths, perhaps ever. We need to build up these resources. Perhaps we need to create special visas for these specialized fields, at least temporarily, in order to get our industry caught up to China.
Well, Adam Savitt, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tiffany. Cynthia Sun is a senior researcher at the Falun Dafa Information Center and the winner of 2023 Miss NTD pageantry. She joined Bay Area innovators to talk about threats and harassment reportedly linked to Chinese state actors against the spiritual group. She shares how her team investigates these cases and what drives her work in human rights advocacy.
So you've been a senior researcher at the Falun InfoNet, the Falun Dafa Information Center for a while. Can you give us some examples of some of the findings you had?
So for context, Falun Dafa Information Center has been researching persecution trends inside China for a long time, mostly religious persecution of Falun Gong. I've been tracking more recently death threats, including bomb threats, rape threats, kidnapping threats of our faith community, even other violent threats targeted towards events that we put on to advocate for an end to religious persecution. For example, last August, myself and my other colleagues and my boss, we received an email saying that they would kill us. And there was a photo of a gun barrel with it cocked, and you could see the inside of the gun barrel. We've received a lot of internal government documents from China, and we have a lot of contacts within the security apparatus that have been providing us with information. And one of the things that were brought up in this 2022 meeting headed by Xi Jinping was that the persecution against Falun Gong, and especially the misinformation, the repression of Falun Gong worldwide, especially in America, has not been creative enough. That was their translated, obviously, language. And we really see over the past 3 years how that's catapulted into this larger disinformation and legal war between the Chinese Communist Party and dissidents here in America, mainly Falun Gong practitioners.
Please tell us about what kind of indications do you have that these threats are coming from people involved with the CCP?
We've reported it to federal and local authorities. And recently, Taiwan actually launched a agency investigation. They found that these threats, partially the ones that they investigated, could be traced back to an IP address tied to the Huawei Institute in China. And what we know about that is all companies, mid to large size, are state-run companies in China. They're required by law in China to have Chinese Communist Party officials inside the bureaucracy of the corporation. And so, it's not hard to imagine that they were paid, individuals inside the Huawei Institute or affiliated with the CCP were paid to send these threatening messages.
Cynthia, you've been an amazing ambassador to bring light to these very serious issues and very important issues. Can you give us a bit of sense, like how did you get started? What is your motivation? What is your drive to do the work you're doing with human rights and other things?
And in college, I got the opportunity to go to Geneva for study abroad, and I was at the United Nations for quite some time. And there was a peace summit being held in late September in Geneva. The first thing that we saw going into this peace summit was actually this white board that was maybe like the size of a football field. It was like incredibly big. It was like this huge standalone white board. It said, celebrating 70 years of China human rights, because I know from personal experience going to China, being chased and being harassed by police officers myself, that human rights that's the complete opposite. And at that point, I kind of changed my mindset to, well, if I can't change the world, then I can change someone's world. And that's really what I've been trying to do, is to like give voice to the voiceless through the Falun Dafa Information Center. And we have successfully rescued multiple families in the past few years out of China who were detained, who were sentenced, but through advocacy with the State Department, we were able to get a few parents and a few family members out. And those small wins really make my day, because some of these families, you know, if you talk about the parents, some of them are elderly, they're in their 70s, they're in their 80s. To be able to get them out and for their families to see them for one last time, or for a few years at least, is just such a blessing, and for them, such a relief.
Allegations of fraud in the recent South Korean presidential election are investigated by an election monitoring panel in Washington, D.C. Their findings point to the Chinese Communist Party and its objective of global domination. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
What we're dealing with is a national security issue for South Korea, but also for America and every other country out there. We are dealing with an international election fraud cartel.
We were told that Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party of Korea, Minju, won by a wide margin, 8%. But the question is, did he?
Chang alleges that there's been evidence of election fraud in the last 3 South Korean national elections. The International Election Monitoring Team presents their investigation findings in the recent June 3rd presidential South Korean election.
In early voting, there were many irregularities. Some of my colleagues have mentioned those, and including evidence of double voting and proxy voting, abnormal ballot papers, mismanagement of ballot boxes, irregularities in the vote counting process, and anomalies in overseas voting, to just list a few.
The presenters say the evidence leads back to the Chinese Communist Party.
The Chinese Communist Party, which is seeking actively in a great power struggle, as they say publicly, to displace the U.S. as the lone superpower of the world, who think that they have a right to all under heaven, so not only the whole world, but indeed the moon and Mars are among the places that they have laid claim to.
Discussing the Chinese theory of global governance, that they are the only legitimate state in the world. And we see what they are doing in Korea to implement their grand design to take over every place.
Former South Korean Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-won addresses the conference from Seoul, South Korea.
We have been standing here alone, but now, as we stand together with our counterparts in the United States, we'll be together. We'll be able to be victorious. We will win this fight.
On Monday, the International Election Monitoring Team is scheduled to give a briefing in the U.S. Congress. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Coming up in women's basketball, WNBA star Caitlin Clark is out again with a leg issue. Dave Martin joins us with the details when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Eric Adams officially announced that he's rerunning for New York City mayor, this time as an independent. NTD's David Lamb has more on the race.
As New York City Mayor Eric Adams' seat is up for re-election, Adams spoke to the public on the steps of City Hall on Thursday.
Believe in us. I believe in our grit, our soul, our resiliency. And I believe that our best days are still ahead. Let's build a city where every kid can dream and every senior feels safe and every working person can thrive. Let's not go backwards. Let's move forward together. So 4 more years mean a lot. It gives me the time to finish the job. And this election is a real choice.
Adams plans to run as an independent amid commotion over the dismissal of his corruption case. Democratic candidate Zohran Mamdani is a top contender in the race. The 33-year-old New York State lawmaker has goals to freeze rents and deliver free universal childcare. He declared victory in the Democratic mayoral primary after Andrew Cuomo dropped out.
Tonight, we made history. In the words of Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it is done.
Billionaire Bill Ackman says he will support another candidate to go against Mamdani. The primary winner will go on to face incumbent Adams. Republican Curtis Sliwa, the founder of the Guardian Angels, will be on the ballot in the fall's general election. David Lamb, NTD News.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on today, but let's start in the NBA as the league held the first round of their annual draft last night. What teams would you say helped themselves the most?
Well, you know, probably going with the most obvious, Dallas taking Cooper Flagg first overall really gives them another star to go along with their 2 stars already with Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving. Of course, he was a slam dunk pick to be first overall. Last year, really as the age of a high school senior, he was pretty much the consensus player of the year at Duke. Had a very impressive season. Let's actually listen to what he said last night after getting picked.
100%. I mean, I'm really excited. You know, I think I keep saying I'm excited to be a sponge, to get down there and just learn, be surrounded by, you know, Hall of Fame caliber guys, and just to be able to learn from them. It's going to be an incredible experience. I feel so blessed, you know, to be in the position I am, and just to get down there, like I said, be a sponge, learn, and try and grow my game as much as I can. Yeah, I mean, I tried to enjoy it as best I could. Obviously, I'm antsy, I'm anxious. You know, I wanted to get going. I was working out the whole time. And I was excited to, you know, get this process over with. But at the same time, it's a dream come true to go through this whole process, you know, be here, enjoy it. And I think I try to do that to the best of my ability.
Now, yesterday I also mentioned how the Brooklyn Nets had 4 first-round picks, but they actually ended up completing another trade to give them 5. I actually was pretty sure they would trade, you know, 1 or some to move up. I mean, their first one was all the way at number 8. As it turns out, they used all 5 picks last night, setting an NBA record for most picks taken in the first round. Amazingly, 4 of those picks were guards. They also took a forward there, so they should figure to have a young team next year. And actually, they ended up trading their second-round pick that's going to be tonight, so no picks for them. But very young team for the Brooklyn Nets going forward.
Well, speaking of the second round, it starts in just over an hour. Which players do you see who are still available, who can make an impact?
You know, a couple of big names out there. Janai Broome of Auburn, also Ryan Kalkbrenner of Creighton. At least some of the big names that are left over right now. I mean, obviously teams are less likely to get an all-star type player here in the second round, but there have been some history, of course. Nikola Jokic, Denver took him in 2014 in the second round. 11 years, 3 MVP later. I mean, he's one of the best players in the league. But also 2012, the Golden State Warriors got Draymond Green. He's a big part of them winning 4 NBA titles there. He's obviously headed for the Hall of Fame too. Of course, before then, you had Dennis Rodman back in 1986. He's a Hall of Famer. Also, Manu Ginobili in 1999 for the Spurs, another Hall of Famer. They're taken in the second round. So sometimes it seems like international players or those players maybe from smaller colleges kind of get overlooked in the second round, but you can find value, I found, with some of those picks taken in the second round as some of these guys were here.
Well, shifting gears to Olympic news, the new president of the International Olympic Committee, Kirsty Coventry, says they will take the lead on gender eligibility in sports. How was this decided previously?
You know, the IOC had each sport's world governing body decide for themselves, you know, gender eligibility and whether transgender athletes could compete or not. So it was kind of maybe a disjointed, some did and some didn't for those 2024 games. But this certainly is the biggest issue right now going on in sports. Let's actually listen to what Kirsty Coventry said regarding this issue.
On the protection of the female category, it was very clear from the members that we have to protect the female category first and foremost. We have to do that to ensure fairness, but we need to do that with a scientific approach and with the inclusion of working with the international federations, whom have already done a lot of work in this area. So we need to bring in the experts. That will take a little bit of time. We need to bring in the international federations so that we have full buy-in to trying to come up with cohesion on this specific topic.
So how she said that protecting the female categories, I think, is very telling for, you know, transgender athletes in sports. Has always been about really biological men in women's sports. I've yet to see the reverse really at any level of sports here. I think it's definitely a good idea to get everyone together on the same page. Like I said, it kind of made for a disjointed Olympics at the 2024 games. I think it's also very telling she's doing this in just her third day on the job as the president of the IOC. This is definitely the biggest issue in sports right now.
Looking at WNBA news, Indiana Fever point guard Caitlin Clark will miss tonight's game against the LA Sparks with a left groin issue. What's her timetable for returning?
You know, according to her head coach, that's Stephanie White, this is going to be a day-to-day thing, but this is already her second absence this season with a left leg injury. Now, previously, she missed 5 games with a left quad injury. The Fever went 2-3 during that time. They're 5-4 actually with her. But even in the preseason, she missed the opener with another left leg injury. Now, previous to this year, she had not missed a game in college or her rookie year in the pros with any kind of injury at all. So certainly unusual for her. And of course, the Fever could certainly use her. She's 11th in scoring this year in the WNBA, 2nd in assists. But it did seem like there was something wrong previously. Her last 3 games, she missed 22 out of 23 three-point attempts. That's very unlike her. She's certainly one of the best three-point shooters in the game. So we'll have to see, you know, how long she's actually out for. We'll definitely be following the story.
Also see what happens to the TV ratings without her.
That's a good one, Tiff. I'm waiting to see that too now, all right?
All right, well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. Around the clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.